First off, I want to give you a warning. After going through this case, I found it infuriating, and so my opinions are in it and my frustrations expressed. I know some of you don't like it, and I think I should just tell the story and leave it up to you to only have opinions. Well, I've done that for many videos, but not this one. For some, I'm going to say what you were thinking, but for others it won't suit you, and that's okay. So if you don't like it, don't watch. Also, I will not tolerate victim blaming here either. Today our case brings us to Melbourne, Australia, specifically to the city of Brunswick. Brunswick is an inner city suburb of Melbourne, which is the capital city of Victoria in the province of New South Wales. Brunswick is a laid-back, multicultural suburb, popular with a young alternative crowd and known as a destination for live music, upbeat pubs and beer gardens. It has a large Irish community and an area that is semi-industrial, so houses and commercial buildings are intertwined. It's also an area that boasts the longest shopping street in Australia, Sydney Road. It's a broad street lined with cafe, bars, restaurants, as well as dozens of shops, and down the centre of the road runs a tram line. But to begin our story, we must first go back to Ireland, to a small village in Townland situated in County Louth. This village is Termafeckin, which can be found 8 kilometres northeast of Drogheda. It is best known as a beautiful, quiet seaside village, and over the years it has become known as one of Louth's more affluent areas to settle. Here, on the 30th of October 1982, a little girl named Jillian would be born to husband and wife George and Edith McKeown. And 3 years later they would have their second child Michael, and so their family was complete. At that time the village was very small and quaint. This is well before the housing boom of the early 2000s, when overpriced housing estates were thrown up in small villages and towns all over Ireland, and sold to the Irish people with money they were fooled into thinking they had. And as usual, the only people that benefited from this boom were the banks and the construction companies. As a child, Jillian was exuberant, messy and clumsy. She was always bumping into things and falling over things. Her family and friends said she was endearing, as she always did it with grace and a laugh. Her mother would say she was goofy but had style. In 1990, the family decided to make a big move to Australia. George got a job in an accounting firm in Perth, in Western Australia, and so the whole family picked up and left for the other side of the world. Jillian took to Australia straight away, even though she was only 8 at that time. Jillian attended Bull Creek Primary School and Rossmine High School. The whole family were granted citizenship there, but in 1996 the family returned to Ireland once more to live. This was another huge move for Jillian, but again she adapted to her new surroundings once more. It was difficult for her to leave her friends and Australia, as now she was a teenager at 14, and it's kind of an awkward age to leave your old life and begin a new one, but she made new friends, but never forgetting her old friends back in Australia. In Ireland, Jillian attended Drogheda Grammar School and then went on to St Oliver's Community College in Drogheda, before graduating with a Bachelor of Art degree from University College Dublin. While in college, she had a number of part-time jobs to help support herself, working in the Clubhouse Bar, a very popular place to go for students on the campus grounds. She also worked in a very prestigious store, Brown Thomas, which is the Irish equivalent to Harrods in London. While working in Brown Thomas, the highlight was getting to meet Kylie Minogue, stating afterwards that she was delighted to meet someone not only famous, but someone that was shorter than herself. While in college, Jillian made the most of her time there, taking part in plays that were put on by the students from the drama department, getting involved with social events as a coordinator, and just embracing opportunities to help others and make new friends along the way. One of these people she would meet was a man, Tom Meagher. They were introduced by a mutual friend in November 2001. Tom would later say it was an awkward first encounter. He said he remembers he couldn't shake her hand because it was bandaged up. Jillian had injured it the day before in a characteristically clumsy fashion, but this inelegant introduction began an 11-year adventure with the most wonderful person I have ever met, he would later say. After graduating, Jillian got a job with Ireland's national television station, RTE, which is Radio Telefí Sharon. In 2008, Tom and Jillian decided to tie the knot in the village church in Termafeckin. Soon after, they, with some friends, decided to take a working holiday to Melbourne. Jillian loved the laid-back atmosphere of Melbourne, and it suited her down to the ground, as she was an easygoing, personable person who was always up for a laugh. She'd be the type that would drag you up to dance, and no was not an option, especially if 80s music was playing. Jillian loved going out, and Melbourne was definitely the place for it. Like I said, lots of bars, cafes and restaurants. But there was also the shopping, and Jillian loved to shop. Her being only 5'2" tall, she loved her high heels, and she had a distinctive way of dressing, always in brightly coloured clothes. Feeling once more at home in Australia, and Jillian being a citizen, Tom and herself decided to stay. Her parents had also by this time moved back to Australia once more. Even though they were living on the other side of the country in Perth, it was a lot closer than Ireland. Tom and Jillian decided to settle in Brunswick, and here they rented an apartment 1 block away from Sydney Road. They were quiet neighbours and well liked. In fact, the neighbours would say the only noise they ever heard coming from the apartment was Jillian's occasional singing. That's not to say Tom and Jillian's relationship was never without its troubles, however. In March 2012, while the two were going through a period of high stress, they separated. But it didn't last long. They were both back together within a few months, and both would say it actually benefited their relationship. They were back and stronger than ever, even making plans to buy a home and discussing starting a family. In January 2012, Jillian had landed a new job as a unit coordinator at a broadcasting company, ABC, which was a local radio station. She quickly became the go-to person when something needed doing. She was so approachable and kind, and she was soon best friends with all her work colleagues, and her bosses loved her. In August 2012, Jillian took 3 weeks off work to return to Ireland for a holiday, catching up with family and old friends. This trip, though, was cut short when she got word that her dad had got a stroke back in Australia. It was his second one, and he was only 55 years old. She returned quickly and spent a week with her parents in Perth. Jillian returned to work on the 16th of September, and it was a long week. She was exhausted, both emotionally from worrying about her dad and physically from all the travelling. By the time Friday, the 22nd of September, she was ready to unwind for the weekend, starting by going out with her work colleagues and attending a birthday party. She had made arrangements with her work colleague Sky to go for after-work pints, and the two left their building at 5 p.m. They headed for their local pub and were later joined by Sky's boyfriend. Jill left the pub just after 7:30 and headed to where the birthday party was being held. She strolled along in her high heels, taking in the atmosphere of the city. She was not the only one out for after-work drinks. It is a common occurrence here in Ireland, as it must be in Australia. There is nothing like a drink after work on a Friday evening. The birthday party was taking place at the Fad Gallery Bar on Coors Lane in Chinatown. Jillian had been invited to the dinner beforehand, but had turned it down, telling the birthday boy, quote, "Dinners are for suckers." Jillian stayed at the party for over an hour before leaving with 3 other colleagues. They got a cab back to Jillian's neighbourhood, but the night was not over. They all ended up at the Brunswick Green Bar, and here she messaged Tom, telling him where she was and asking him to join her there. Poor Tom had fallen asleep on the couch and hadn't seen the message. The group stayed there until closing, and then, with just Jillian and one remaining colleague, they walked down the road to Bar Etiquette. The two sat in the beer garden having one more for the road. The man with Jillian was also celebrating that night, as he and his wife had just found out she was pregnant with their second child. Jillian, on the other hand, was more focused on her career. With her 30th birthday not long away, she was contemplating changing career. She longed to get into comedy writing. At 1:30 a.m, the bar closed and the pair decided to end the night. They walked out onto the street, and the colleague offered to walk Jillian home or get a cab together. But Jillian declined both offers. She was less than 800 metres from her front door, which would be about a 10-minute walk. She said she'd be fine, and so they parted ways. Jillian walked down Sydney Road. She was a bit tipsy, but not falling around drunk. The route was well lit and busy, with taxis going up and down the road. The way home was so familiar to Jillian. She had taken this walk so many times before. On her way up the street, Jillian stopped and asked 3 girls she had met for a cigarette, and they obliged. Later they said that while she had been drinking, Jillian seemed reasonably okay. She was laden down with both her work bag and handbag and was trying to walk up a hill in her high heels. She told the girls that her heels were starting to get to her, but that she'd be okay. On her walk home, Jillian called her brother Michael to check in on how their father was doing, but the line was bad and Michael would say she was upset with worry over their father. A man in a car with his 14-year-old son recalled passing Jillian at this point, and he had considered stopping to offer a lift, but didn't as he was afraid it would be misconstrued. Among the cars on the road and people walking, there was one particular man. A man in a light-coloured pants and a blue hoodie. CCTV footage would show him walking up and down, back and forth across the street. As Jillian passed the doorway of a bridal boutique, the man stopped her in her tracks. He stood before her and Jillian backed away from him, looking around her as he spoke to her. All this was captured on camera from inside the bridal shop. Then Jillian and this man walked out of camera shot, and this would be the last time she would be seen alive. Meanwhile, Michael tried to bring her back, but each time there was no answer. Tom, Jillian's husband, was now awake and also worried that she was still not home. He texted her asking where she was but got no response. He continued texting her, increasingly more worried in tone. By 5 a.m. and Jillian still hadn't returned home, Tom left the house to go look for her. He walked down to the bar Etiquette and retraced the route he thought she might have taken. This bringing no joy, Tom messaged Jillian's work colleague Skye, who Jillian had started her night out with. She was immediately concerned, and along with her help, Tom rang around all the people who had been out that night with Jillian. Tom went out again and searched the neighbourhood to see if he could see any sign of her. Finally, at around 6 a.m. on that Saturday morning, Tom gave in and phoned the police. Initially, the police took Tom reporting Jillian missing with a grain of salt. They saw it as a person out drinking who maybe had one too many and never made it to her proper home that night. And so looking for Jillian lacked urgency as far as the police were concerned. Staff from the local bars were questioned and hospitals were contacted to see if anyone of Jill's description had been admitted. The people she was out with that night were also contacted, but there was no sign of her. When Jillian didn't return home on the Saturday night, it was then the police took her disappearance more serious. The Sydney Road area was searched again from Bar Etiquette up to Hope Street and over to Lux Way, where Jillian and Tom lived. In one back alley, a pencil was found with the logo ABC on it. On Monday morning at 6:30 a.m, the police found Jillian's handbag in the same lane off Hope Street. The bag had Jillian's belongings in it, including her ABC work ID and her credit card, but it hadn't been there when the police searched there earlier. It was thought the bag had been planted there. It turned out that a man had gone to the police station, stating that he had found the bag in the laneway and had taken it home, in the hopes that there was something valuable in it. But when he saw on the news that the bag he had was belonging to Jillian, who was at this stage still missing, he returned the bag to the lane and told the police. The fact that the bag had been separated from Jillian gave police growing concern, and nothing was missing from the bag except her mobile phone. The Brunswick area was searched again, this time more thoroughly. Rooftops, garden sheds, drains, and so on. CCTV footage was also collected from businesses along the route she was thought to have taken. They needed to know what Jillian's last movements were. Meanwhile, Tom was organising media attention on the case in the hopes of finding his wife, and the police were focusing in on Tom. He was their main suspect. As with all serious crimes, the police start with the closest person to the alleged victim, and Tom was no different. This too stretched to media and social media. He was the main focus. Tom appeared on TV to plead with the public for any information that would help bring Jillian home. He was judged as not grief-stricken enough or too emotional.
Please.
The police searched Tom and Jillian's home and took Tom's car in for forensic examination. This caused the theories to go into overdrive. The first footage the police reviewed was from outside the Meagher's home, from across the street. Jillian didn't appear on this footage, which proved that she hadn't made it home that night. Then the footage from Sydney Road were knitted together, following Jillian's movements until she got to the bridal boutique. Just before the corner of Hope Street and this shop, there was no sign of Jillian, which means something had happened to her in that area. The footage at the bridal shop showed Jillian talking to a man in a blue hoodie and another man in a red top passing them by. The police decided to release this footage in the hopes it would bring these two men forward to see if they had any information on Jillian. The man in the red top recognised himself as soon as he saw the footage. He was from the area and had been walking to a kebab shop on the corner of Hope Street. He told police that he had seen Jillian and the other man, but didn't see anything alarming about the situation. But he did say that Jillian didn't continue up the road, as he had sat outside the window of the kebab shop and Jillian never passed him. The focus now was on the man in the blue hoodie, especially as there was no signs of him coming forward. Over 500 people called in with tips following the release of the footage to the media, showing Jillian speaking to the man in the blue hoodie. Jillian's bank accounts were checked and they showed no activity, and her phone records were also checked and tracked. The records showed that her phone left Brunswick and out of the city onto a toll road and onto the highway, and found that the signal finally stopped in the middle of a rural area. The police could also tell that the phone travelled by car, but they had no idea if Jillian was with her phone or if she had been alive or dead. They also checked the cameras at the tolls and entered in each car registration, and one of the names that came up was Adrian Ernest Bailey. He had a criminal record, and quite a long one, for violent sexual assault. The Friday night Jillian was out with her work colleagues, there was another person out drinking and socialising also. Adrian Bailey went to the Quiet Man Hotel with his girlfriend to attend a work function set up by his employer, Rangedale Drainage Services. He was dressed smartly in light-coloured jeans and shirt. Bailey and his girlfriend stayed at the hotel until around 10 p.m. They hailed a taxi and headed to the lounge bar on Swanston Street. But as the night went on, things turned for the worst. Bailey and his girlfriend had a huge row. Afterwards, Bailey's girlfriend excused herself to go to the bathroom, but instead she left the bar altogether. It took him a while to realise she had left the bar, and he was seen on CCTV stomping up and down looking for her and constantly dialing and redialing on his phone, obviously trying to get through to her. She had got a taxi back to their home in Coburg, but she didn't stay there. By the time Bailey made his way home also, she was still gone. He therefore left, but not before he put on a blue hoodie. He would later say he got a taxi back to the Quiet Man Hotel to get his car. He also said that on the way the taxi driver deemed him too drunk and kicked him out of the car because he feared that he was going to vomit, and that's how he came to be on Sydney Road in Brunswick. Adrian Bailey, who would change his name later by deed poll, was born on the 14th of July 1971 to parents Ernest and Christine Edwards. They had 4 other children, of which Adrian was the eldest. The family lived in Melbourne, and he would later say he had a difficult childhood and he was sexually abused from the age of 9. Because of this, he was prone to outbursts of anger and mood swings, especially if things didn't go his way or turn out as he planned. He left school and home at a young age. He moved out of Melbourne and into a small town in the Yarra Valley region of Victoria, which is famous for its cool climate wine production. In April 1990, Bailey, now 18, married his pregnant teenage girlfriend, who went on to have the baby later that year. In 1996, they had another child, but all was not rosy in the marriage, as Bailey had ended up in prison during those first 6 years. On the 8th of June 1990, only a little while after he got married, Bailey committed his first sexual assault. He asked a friend of his sister, who was 16 years old, to help him organise a birthday party for his new wife. But this was a ruse to get the girl into his house and on her own. He held the girl in the house against her will and raped her. He was charged 2 days later. He denied this had happened, and after appearing in court, he was released on bail. While out on bail, he grabbed a 17-year-old girl who was walking home after getting off the bus. He tore her clothes, poked her in the eyes, and then groped her. He tried to rape her, but couldn't. This girl went to the police, and 2 weeks later she identified Bailey as her attacker, even though on the night he had threatened to kill her if she told anyone of the attack. Again, Bailey denied the attack, and again he was released on bail. So that's 2 accusations, and twice he is released on bail. I'm seeing a pattern here. Again, out on bail, Bailey was driving when he spotted a female hitchhiker on the side of the road. He pulled over and offered her a lift. Bailey, rather than bring her to her destination, pulled onto a dirt road and tried to force her to perform oral sex on him. However, she managed to escape and went straight to the police. Again, Bailey was arrested and maintained his pattern of denial. On the 7th of June 1991, Bailey appeared in court to face all 3 charges of sexual assault, rape, attempted rape and threats to kill, which he had given a somewhat limited confession to. He was found guilty and sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the first 3 to be served before he could apply for parole. But he would only end up serving 22 months. Bailey and his wife separated in 1995 while she was pregnant, and Bailey ended up moving around for work. He had numerous girlfriends and would go on to have 2 more children. It was in 2000 that Bailey changed his name from Edwards for obvious reasons. This name change hid the fact of who he really was, that he was a convicted sex offender. Shortly after his name change, Bailey was in trouble once again. This time he picked more vulnerable victims which were less likely to report him or identify him. He went to areas where he knew he could pick up sex workers. As we know, Bailey didn't just want sex, he wanted violence along with it. And so he would pick up these women, bring them to a secluded area in a laneway, park the passenger side of the car close to the wall so there was no escape, and here he would beat and rape the women. But these women were not afraid to go to the police, and they went in numbers, 16 women in total, to report what had happened. The police had no choice but to do something, so the police set up a sting operation to catch the man. With a description of the man, statements taken, DNA collected, a partial number plate and visiting the crime scene, the police were able to link the crimes to Adrian Bailey. Bailey was arrested at his home and his clothes and car were seized. DNA was taken at the police station, which gave police a concrete connection to Bailey and the women who were attacked. Of course, when Bailey was interviewed, he denied everything, but eventually he would admit that he did use prostitutes as his girlfriend wasn't giving him any, and he had to get sex somewhere. So basically, it was his girlfriend's fault that he had to use prostitutes. Bailey was charged with 43 counts altogether, from rape, false imprisonment, threatening to kill and recklessness causing injury. Again, he was granted bail, and 6 months later he was found guilty of 16 rapes. On the 26th of April 2002, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison, with 8 years to be served before he would be up for parole. The judge stated in his summoning up that Bailey was a danger to society and not likely to be rehabilitated. In March 2010, Bailey was released after serving less than the minimum term of 8 years. Also, his DNA was not kept on file. The police that had dealt with Bailey's case were not notified of his release, and he was paroled under the standard parole conditions and not on the conditions the judge had set out during sentencing. So Bailey slipped back into Melbourne society without a care or anyone keeping a close eye on him. Bailey moved into accommodation that took in people down on their luck or just released from prison. He also soon found himself 2 new girlfriends after his other partner left him while he was in prison. Each one didn't know the other existed and neither had a clue of his criminal past, but one of them would soon see his sadistic side and would end it with him. In February 2012, Bailey would be before the courts once again for an unprovoked attack on a man outside a hotel. He was found guilty and sentenced to 3 months in prison. Bailey appealed this and was back on the streets shortly after. His parole was not affected by this attack. Bailey continued to move around quite a bit, and people that got to know him said he was meticulous in everything he did, from how he kept himself, his clothes and hair, and working out. Also in his surroundings, wherever he was staying, it was clean and neat as a pin. Over the years, he broke 5 parole conditions. He missed meetings, drank, and broke curfew. When Bailey's car had been identified by police on the road the night Jillian disappeared, his mobile phone records were also accessed. His phone location mirrored Jillian's from around 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. The phones had moved from Brunswick through the city onto the toll road, then the highway and into the countryside. Given this evidence and Bailey's history, the police tapped his phone. They contacted his caseworker, but due to miscommunication, Bailey was told that he was being investigated for a serious crime and that he needed to come in to meet with his parole officer. Since Bailey had gotten away with not turning up for meetings in the past, he was definitely not going to be turning up for this one, and so the idea was scrapped. The police would have to go at him from a different angle. They called to where Bailey was living, which was a 6-minute drive from where Tom and Jillian lived. They showed footage to Bailey's girlfriend, the same girlfriend that had left him in the bar the night Jillian disappeared. She identified Bailey. The house was searched with a number of items being taken as evidence, including a shovel with dirt on it from recent use, parts of a smashed mobile phone and a SIM card, which the girlfriend had found in Bailey's clothes after taking them from the washing machine. The SIM card would turn out to be Jillian's. When the search was completed by police, they contacted Bailey to come home, and so he left work with police still having him under surveillance. He didn't run or change his demeanour, he just acted as normal and casual as he approached his house where police were waiting for him. He was arrested there and then and brought to the police station. Bailey had no idea that he had been the main focus of the police investigation. He thought he was just being brought in for questioning as routine, and that others had been brought in also. When asked about his movements on the night Jillian disappeared, he told police that he had been out drinking. He and his girlfriend had a row and she had left. He said he went home, got in her car and began searching the streets looking for her and returned to his house at around 5:30 a.m. The police told him that they had his mobile phone records and that they had tracked his movements on that night. He said he didn't know how to explain them, that he never left the city and hadn't travelled out north towards Gisborne, which is about 54 kilometres northwest of Melbourne. The police also told him that Jillian's mobile phone had also made the same journey at the same time as his, and his car was captured on CCTV going through the tolls, and they had Jillian's SIM, which they found in his house. Eventually and reluctantly, with all the evidence the police had put to him, Bailey confessed. He cried and said he now wanted to do the right thing, but at the same time said he didn't want to talk about what he had done to Jillian. He did eventually talk. He said on the night he had seen Jillian on the street, that she was upset and drunk. He walked with her a bit, but eventually she told him to fuck off. This made Bailey angry and so he strangled her, but it took him a while to admit he raped her as well. Jillian had been dragged into a back alley off Hope Street, minutes from her home. After Bailey killed Jillian, he went about disposing of her body. He went home, changed his clothes. He got into his girlfriend's car, which was registered in his name, but belonged to his girlfriend, and drove back to the alley. CCTV footage would be recovered later, showing Bailey's car driving into the lane off Hope Street and leaving at around 4:30 a.m. He put Jillian into the boot of his car along with her torn clothes, mobile phone, and started to drive out of the city. After an hour of driving, Bailey pulled off the highway and travelled along by roads until he pulled up onto Black Hill Road. From here, he drove up a rural dirt road. Eventually, he came to a stop and got out of the car, leaving his headlights on. He began digging, but only managed to dig a shallow hole, barely a foot deep and barely big enough to fit Jillian's body. Between 5 and 6 a.m, he made a number of phone calls to a work colleague, possibly trying to establish an alibi for himself. Then he got back into his car and went to make his way home, but he had run out of petrol. He managed to flag down a local man and he was brought to a petrol station and was caught on CCTV buying petrol there. When he got back to his house at around 6:30 a.m, he was seen by a neighbour. They spoke for a minute and Bailey went inside, smashed Jillian's phone and went into his girlfriend to try and make amends with her. She had returned while Bailey was out. His girlfriend heard him having a shower and moving about the house. When he went into her, she noticed he had a bruise across his nose. He told her that while he had been out looking for her, he had gotten into a fight with a couple of guys. The two slept in till 12:30 p.m, then got into the girlfriend's car and drove to the Quiet Man Hotel to pick up Bailey's actual car that he had left there the night before when they went out. They spent the rest of the day watching films and had a takeaway, but Bailey had not forgotten what he had done that Saturday morning. Late Sunday night, he was captured on CCTV going to the local garage and washing and cleaning out his girlfriend's car, and he did the same the next day. He did turn up for work on the Monday, but left early, claiming he wasn't feeling well. He used this time to get 4 new tyres and a new mat for the boot of the car he had used on the night he killed Jillian, and also went about getting the car transferred into his girlfriend's name, cutting all ties to him. When the news came out about Jillian going missing, he warned his girlfriend to be careful, and if she was going anywhere, she was to take the car, adding though that the husband probably did it. Back at the station, Bailey eventually told police where Jillian was buried and was willing to show them. They drove out to Black Hill Road and Bailey pointed out the area where Jillian was. It wasn't long before police came upon the shallow grave. Bailey was driven back to the station. The area was sealed off and forensics began examining the makeshift grave and surrounding area. Bailey appeared later that day at a special sitting of the Magistrates' Court. He was remanded into custody straight away. An autopsy was performed on Jillian a week after she was recovered. It showed that she had been brutally beaten and raped. There was severe damage done to her beautiful face and she had died from manual strangulation. On Friday, the 28th of September 2012, Bailey appeared once more in court. This time Tom, Jillian's husband, and Michael, Jillian's brother, attended. Bailey walked into court with his head down, and as the charges were read out once more, he gave no reaction. He was remanded in custody and no bail was given. The police continued their investigation, searching the route Bailey had taken that night. He had said he had thrown items belonging to Jillian out the window of the car. From the time Jillian disappeared, media and social media blew up, and as more details were released, more theories of what happened to Jillian were speculated upon. When Jillian's body was found, a march was organised by the Brunswick locals in memory of their neighbour, whom they never met but felt a deep connection and sympathy for. 30,000 men, women and children turned up to walk along Sydney Road. Memorials also started to appear outside the bridal boutique, outside the Meagher's apartment and on the little dirt road that Jillian had been found beside. The city and Australia as a whole mourned the loss of Jillian, who had been walking home only minutes from her apartment. When details of Bailey's previous convictions came out, there was understandably outrage by the people of Australia. On Friday the 5th of October 2012, there were 2 services, one in Melbourne and one in Drogheda. The service in Melbourne was a private affair in a park, which was closed off to the public, but hundreds of floral tributes were left at the gate to the park. Jillian's favourite songs were played and even some dancing before 29 white doves were released, one for each year of her life. She was then cremated. Later, a mass was said in the church in Drogheda after a memorial procession made its way through the town. After the funeral, the focus was back on Bailey, as is always the case. He appealed to the courts about the unfair social media attention, which stated that hanging was too good for him, and others saying he should be left to rot in prison without a trial. Bailey's solicitors stated that he could not possibly get a fair, unbiased hearing, and so the judge ordered that no media were allowed to comment further on Bailey. Because of this order, comments and reports on Bailey did die down, but not altogether. The negative reports had an effect on Bailey, so much so that he was found in his cell with self-inflicted wounds that gave the impression that he tried to take his own life. Oh, poor baby. And I say this because the injuries were not deep enough and he was released from hospital the next day, perhaps looking for sympathy rather than actually wanting to take his own life. But it did give him something he didn't bargain for as a suicide risk. He was isolated from other prisoners, had his own personal guard 24/7 outside his cell, and had to be checked up on every half hour. Bailey was not a happy bunny about this at all. In March 2013, Bailey appeared in court. The court was open to the public and Bailey had to be protected by 3 guards and a 6-inch glass wall around him. He pleaded not guilty to 2 charges of rape, but guilty to 1 charge of rape and not guilty to the charge of murder. The book of evidence was released to the public, except for some photographs which were deemed too sensitive. I've never heard of this done before and I find it very unusual. Less than a month later, Bailey appeared again in court to arrange to enter new pleas in the case. Now he was pleading guilty to 1 account of rape and murder. This was accepted by the judge. The ban on publishing anything in the media about Bailey was extended, but it was okay to release to the public what was done to poor Jillian. This infuriates me. Again, dehumanising the victim and holding the perpetrator on a pedestal. Give me strength. The only person who went against the court's blackout of the media reports on Bailey was Darren Hinch. He was a well-known media personality. He ran his own online blog. He decided to publish information about Bailey being allowed to move from his parents' house due to their concerns about him attacking another woman, and this is how he came to live with his girlfriend. He published this post the same day Bailey appeared in court to enter his pleas. Hinch came to the attention of the court. He was charged with contempt. On the 11th of June 2013, the sentencing hearing began. Psychology reports were submitted stating that Bailey suffered from borderline personality disorder and felt a strong desire to have power over his victims and was highly likely to re-offend. He said that although Bailey expressed remorse, an element of this was for the damage he had done to his own life. The defence said he was remorseful for what he had done, that he had been drunk that night, so drunk that a taxi driver had put him out of his cab, and because of this he had a rage-based response to his interaction with Jillian. The defence asked for a minimal, non-parole based sentence, taking into account that he pleaded guilty to 1 account of rape and murder, his remorse and to provide hope in his rehabilitation. 7 impact statements were read out to the court from Tom, Jillian's parents, her brother, her friend, her boss from ABC and others read out by solicitors. On the 19th of June, everyone gathered again in court number 4 for sentencing. The judge read out a summary of the case, noting it was a particularly horrific crime, made worse by the attempt of Bailey trying to conceal Jillian's body, as it would never have been found. He also mentioned the fact that Bailey was out on bail when he committed this rape and murder. The judge rejected that alcohol played a part in this crime and cited the other 9 charges that Bailey had been charged with before. The judge even went as far as listing these previous charges before the court. Unfortunately, he had to take into account the guilty plea and the remorse Bailey showed, and to give him the chance of rehabilitation, leading to possible release in the future. Bailey was sentenced to 15 years for the rape and 35 years for the murder, with a non-parole term of 35 years. This means he would not be eligible for parole until 2048, and so he'd be 77 years old. Bailey had 28 days to appeal his sentence, and he did so on the last day. This showed his lack of remorse for what he had done, and there was a public outcry over this. This application of appeal was denied. Because of this case, the Parole Board policies of Victoria were reviewed, and a report was released in August 2013. It stated a number of recommendations for reform. Two main recommendations were being rid of the automatic application for parole being made on behalf of the convicted by the system. This automatic application led to a culture that saw parole as an automatic entitlement other than a privilege to those who had proved themselves worthy. From this point on, prisoners would have to make their own applications to the Adult Parole Board for consideration. The second change was to make breaking bail or parole conditions an offence in itself. Before this change, a person out on parole or bail could not be rearrested and put back in prison, which to me is mind-boggling. In July 2014, when a woman who worked as a sex worker came forward after recognising Bailey in the media, he was charged and found guilty of 3 counts of rape, 2 counts of assault, making threats to kill and false imprisonment. Another woman, also a sex worker, came forward, and in this second case Bailey again denied any involvement in the crime. He was found guilty in March 2015. The final case taken against Bailey was a 27-year-old tourist from the Netherlands, which to his form denied raping this woman and holding her hostage, but there was CCTV footage of Bailey in the area on the night in question, and again he was found guilty. His sentence was increased to a minimum of 43 years from 35 to account for the new convictions against him. In March 2016, Bailey appealed the 3 convictions that came about after his conviction of the rape and murder of Jillian. His defence claimed that the sentencing of 18 years was excessive, and it was because of social media that these women came forward, and not because of any hard evidence, as these women claimed, and these rapes happened too far back. The appeals court quashed the first 2 convictions, as the women only recognised Bailey from a Facebook page, and no other evidence substantiated their claim. The appeal against the Dutch backpacker was dismissed. As a result of this, the term imposed on him for all 3 cases was reduced from 43 years to 40. While in prison, Bailey had to be moved to a high security section of the prison for his own protection, as he was stabbed with a fork while in the more public section. Oh, again, poor baby. As for Jillian's death, we tried to glean a more positive outlook of her death. Tom, Jillian's husband, has been an advocate for women all around the world, trying to make women feel safer in our society. Jillian had been stopped by a strange man on the street, and she was faced with a choice of walking up a well-lit street but further from home, or to turn a corner into a quieter, dark-lit neighbourhood, but at least turning towards safety. We do try and glean some lesson from a crime, a moral of a story. Sometimes it leads to a victim blaming. She shouldn't have been walking home at that time of the morning with drink in her, or we should teach our men not to rape people. While both do have their points, we have to be responsible for our own safety. But we live in a society where these things happen, and we must be conscious of this. No one is immune to this happening to them, and this is where we must be cautious of our decisions. Get a taxi, get a friend to walk home with you. Not everyone has the same moral compass, and bad things happen to good people, and they are monsters out there lurking in the shadows or in plain sight. We have to make better decisions. Many a night I've walked home alone after a night out and thought nothing of it, especially with drink in me, and only now I realise how lucky I've been. Like all my cases, there's lessons to be learned. No matter how women should have the right to feel safe, they are not. Even down to men, they are not safe either. My cousin's son was in a takeaway one night, and because he complimented a girl and was flirty with her, while she took it well, a so-called white knight decided he was harassing her. When he left with his food, 5 guys jumped him and beat him to a pulp and sent him to hospital. He could have been killed with one wrong blow. I put this in because no one is safe out there. It's not just the women. We need to be more careful and make better decisions. Or maybe there's nothing we can do when it comes to strangers. Rest in peace, Jillian.